Welcome to the Baunfire podcast. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about my Summer Game Fest review, Dragon Age's new name, a Halo remaster for PS5, and much more. Before we get started, subscribe to The Baunfire on your favorite podcast app and leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, or subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as a YouTube member and as a Twitch subscriber. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, please check out the link in the show description. Let's talk about Xbox news before we get into the actual news and how interesting the timing tends to be. I do paint this podcast as a general gaming podcast. I enjoy hitting all of the marks. But if you've listened long enough, you probably know I'm an Xbox preferrer. I definitely try to never put myself in that camp of like the super fan influencer types who just like are really aggressive towards other platforms and other fans of other platforms, and especially like the other super fan influencers. You may see me pop off on social media here and there when people are just being like stupid and being like completely obviously sensational and clickbaity, even though technically that means I'm falling for their ruse. But oh well. But I have a preference. I like Xbox. I like the ecosystem. I've been in the ecosystem since the first Xbox through a roommate, and then I owned a 360, and I've had Xbox ever since then, except I did have a PS3 for a short time. Didn't like it. Hated the controller. I just I don't desire for this to be like an Xbox podcast. I want to talk about everything. But I do find myself, running into this subject that I want to talk about with the interesting timing of Xbox news. People were pretty hyped. People were pretty excited about this upcoming Xbox showcase. And I think they still are. It really is shaping up too, and I think we say this every year, but I really believe it this year, to be a good show. I think that things are finally falling in order. The dominoes are falling, not to mention the ABK acquisition, for them to have just a bunch of good games coming out pretty often. But it is so interesting that anytime something like this comes up, it's so curious how little rumors pop up to try to seemingly to take the wind out of the sails. We'll talk about something like this specifically, but what I wanted to actually mention was a tweet by Tom Henderson, who is a pretty well-known, calling him a journalist is probably kind. He mostly seems to be like someone who is there to spread leaked info that other people have broken NDAs for. I mean, it just seems like it's the bulk of his thing. He does own like a gaming news website where there's other people involved and stuff now, but he himself, that's kind of what he has gotten a name for. And he posted something so interesting, saying something along the line of, he wonders how Xbox is back in the same position they were in 6 months ago when the multi-platform rumors first started and everyone lost their minds, their collective minds, to the point where Xbox like came out and did like a podcast to talk about what was really going on and what wasn't. And it was just interesting seeing him kind of be like, how will Xbox deal with these rumors? As the person who's one of the main people spreading these rumors. Like, it's so like quaint almost to hear him or any of the other people being like, how does Xbox keep finding itself in these positions where these wild rumors are spreading? And it's this thing where it's like, and we'll talk more about it, but they can't squash every rumor, or else they would never be messaging anything else, because it seems like for whatever reason, the rumor mill around Xbox is especially common, and it seems especially useful for folks in the games media industry, especially content creators as well. And so it just, to me, it was just so funny seeing this person who is one of the main purveyors of these rumors, for their own personal gain and wealth, to be like, how will Xbox deal with this, as the person who is doing a pretty big chunk of it. So just kind of keep that thought of mine in mind as we jump into the gaming news. We're going to kick off with Xbox and jump right into what I'm talking about. So this week it came out that Halo 1 is being considered for a remake that would potentially be released on the PlayStation platform. This rumor came out in a paywalled article from Tom Warren. It also stated in the article, and believe it or not, this is not being reported on basically at all. None of the headlines are including this, that despite this strategy of potentially having more multi-platform games, they still fully intend to keep exclusive games and to have games that are only on the Xbox platform. But of course that's getting lost in the sauce. This was an interesting one. What's frustrating about these rumors is it cites specifically that this idea is there's conversations happening. It's being considered. There's no thought that it's actually happening. There's no thought that anyone's actually working on this. There's no thought that there's any material progress on this kind of directive. Literally just considering it. And what's frustrating about a rumor like this is that it only kind of pushes the narrative that's been, I think, pretty damaging, at no fault of Xbox to their own brand. And it seems like it's been very profitable for the people pushing these rumors, like Tom Warren and Tom Henderson and many, many, many other outlets. And it's frustrating because, at least my impression, is that a big corporation, especially like Microsoft and Xbox, is going to consider literally everything. I think I've talked about this before on here, but I made even a big tweet about it and talked about how, like during COVID times, Phil Spencer had a streaming Xbox box on his shelf in the background of the videos he did. He is known for teasing things that way and so on and so forth. And, everyone thought for sure that was coming. And now it kind of looks like it's probably not, unless we find out more about it this year. But, I believe even reports said that project was being, designed, being considered, being tested. And for whatever reason, they've decided not to do it, more than likely. But there was a prototype sitting on his shelf. It sounds like it was probably functional. And so, the trouble is that because of the way these corporations work, especially Microsoft and Xbox, but you could do the same thing, I'm sure, for PlayStation, Nintendo, EA, Ubisoft, all these big giant publishers, is they consider everything. That streaming box, we remember from the ABK leaks, the acquisition leaks with Xbox, they considered trying to buy Nintendo. They consider probably basically everything. They've probably considered putting all of their games on other platforms, but it doesn't mean they're going to do it. And it is almost certain that like 99% of the things they consider never happen. So sure, maybe they're considering doing a Halo 1 remake and putting it on PlayStation, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen, and it probably means it won't. Now, a big part of this conversation is the whole directive at Microsoft right now with Xbox, where they are looking at that multi-platform strategy and seeing what games work and which ones don't. I will forever be pushing back. It at least in this initial iteration of this multi-platform push, it seems like the only ones that have been successful are these big cooperative multiplayer games that kind of benefit from as big of a player base as possible. Sea of Thieves, Grounded, where the other ones that they've tried with Hi-Fi Rush and Pentiment, maybe it's because of the type of games they were, haven't been successful at all. They didn't get any notoriety for their sales, where Sea of Thieves led the PlayStation Ed sales for a bit, and Grounded is in the top 10 list, or was at one point at least. So, if you look at it logically, it seems more likely that, maybe the Halo multiplayer could end up there. This remaster rumor is weird too, because there is the Master Chief Collection. That was, I believe, the Xbox One generation, a remaster of all of the first three games. I think the first three. Or it was at least 1 and 2 in Reach. I can't remember if it was 3 or not. But it's there. The simplest thing to do would just be to release that on the PlayStation. But they probably won't, because, with the same statement in Tom Warren's article that they want to keep exclusives, you would think that the base minimum exclusives they would keep forever would be the Halo, the Gears, those like baseline franchises. And it would just be really strange to see Halo on another platform, especially PlayStation. Not that it's impossible. The kind of final part of it is just that I think it just sucks, because, like I said before in my little intro, that the timing of this is so purposeful, right? Like they could have speculated this at any time in the last 6 months, because these conversations have been probably happening that whole time. And, the timing right before the showcase, which is likely to be pretty good, sucks. There's also kind of, if I pull back as a Xbox fan and look at it purely from a business point of view, I would say that as soon as a game is no longer pushing hardware sales or Game Pass sales for Xbox, then it wouldn't hurt to put it on another platform. I don't really want to see that. I don't necessarily want that to happen. But from a pure business perspective, it makes sense that as soon as a game stops being a hardware or Game Pass pusher, then what does it hurt to put it on another platform? Now, the hardware pusher may be almost immediate. I suspect a very small number of people bought an Xbox to play Hi-Fi Rush. I suspect that was mostly for people who were already on the platform. And so, when it went over, it wasn't that surprising. Same with Pentiment. Grounded and Sea of Thieves, maybe those have been a little bit more, but, Sea of Thieves has been out forever. And Grounded was like a smaller project for Obsidian, and it isn't that surprising that, they were willing to put that over there. So, I don't know. This just sucks. It's weird because it obviously works. I think it was really hilarious that Tom Warren put this behind a paywall. It just kind of reeks of that, like, knowing what they're doing thing. Maybe he's right. Maybe it happens. Maybe they make this remake and it goes on PlayStation. I have no idea. I hope for the majority of the gaming community, and not the console war people on social media who are really biting on this stuff and really getting into it. I really hope, and it seems like the majority of people kind of see what's going on, and they're like, maybe write like actual articles about things that matter. Like, if these things happen, they happen, but it's so obvious that there's a lot of pandering going on. There's a lot of sensationalizing going on. There's maybe some, I don't want to call it lying, but there's there's a lot of creativity being used with the truth of all of this stuff, in my opinion. So we'll see what happens. I'm kind of indifferent. I'm just kind of curious to see what they do or don't do in the future. I suspect that we'll probably get some kind of indications of these things during the showcase. But Phil Spencer and I believe the executive team, is doing an interview with Ryan McCaffrey of IGN after the Xbox showcase, where supposedly he plans on kind of addressing a lot of this stuff. How upfront they are, we have no idea. I really saw a lot of people pushing Ryan McCaffrey as like he's gonna ask the hard questions, and like maybe he will. I don't really see him as like a hard hitting journalist. He's pretty fluffy, even though he seems to be drinking the juice as well lately. So who knows? We'll see what happens. I am very curious. We did have a kind of a weird story. Xbox has updated their box art design for their series games for the third time this generation, which has been out for about 4 years. For what it's worth, I think that the new design is the best looking one. So for the people who still buy physical, which it is interesting how it's not just the difference in console sales. It really does seem like Xbox gamers just don't buy physical nearly as much as PlayStation, especially. I don't know if I would count Nintendo because I think their whole online system's kind of junk, but from what I'm told or heard. But it is like a weird thing for them to change it that much. Like, I'm the first one who can say, like, that's strange. I also haven't bought a physical game. I was gifted one for the Xbox One generation, but I haven't personally purchased a physical game since the 360 or PS3. So I don't even know what their iterations have looked like of physical box art. But I did see some people, some journalists trying to like swing this into like, oh, Xbox, dude, they don't know what they're doing. It's like, God, guys, like, be more transparent. Come on. But it is what it is. But kind of a strange story. And then Game Pass got a bunch of new games this week. But the kind of surprising one was Octopath Traveler 1 and 2. So they've had one before, because that's how I've played it. There's no way I paid for that game. I understand the legend of these games, and I know people really like 2 a lot, and think it was a big improvement. I remember the first one. I booted it up. I picked a character, and I swear there was 30 minutes of text-only dialogue to open up the game, and I just stopped. I turned it off. So I crack open Octopath Traveler 2. I pick a dude who I want to start the story with, and it's the exact same thing. I know there's a genre. This is a genre for people. I know there's people who love this genre. I couldn't even bother to get past the intro. Like, I'm a bad gamer. I'm so sorry, but you can't. I'm sure the people who are into this type of game, who are into the Octopath games, this is their thing and they love it. I have no idea how they've attracted any new players to this series. Like, I just can't imagine sitting there and reading and clicking through dialogue. I have no idea how there's people who enjoy that. It just makes no sense to me. But if that's your thing, no hate. Good for you. I'm glad you found the thing you love. It is just not my thing, not even a little bit. So, but if you've wanted to play those games and you have Game Pass, there they are. Good luck. Have fun. For PlayStation, we had an interesting story about Sony removing the 8K designation from the PlayStation 5 box. This is something that, and maybe it's still there, but Xbox Series had this as well. And I specifically remember, at least I remember Xbox, and I assume PlayStation as well, did, during their, advertising and media, they did say 8K. They would mention it, but if I remember correctly, it was always for media playback, that it could do 8K media playback. There was never an expectation that it would play games and be able to put them out at 4K or at 8K, which is like, most people don't even have 4K monitors or TVs yet, let alone 8. And 8K is like a hyper niche thing right now. There's so few TVs. I can't imagine there's any large number of monitors. there's just no market for it. And oddly enough, there was a game, and I can't remember. It was like a launch game on Xbox that actually rendered internally at 8K and then downscaled to 4K to make it like super smooth or something. It was like a voxel based game or a pixel based game. Yeah, this is dumb. They needed to take that off because I don't even know if the HDMI version that the PS5 or Xbox Series even has. I don't know if it can do 8K. If it can, it's only at 30 or 60 FPS maybe. So just a silly story. Though there were some rumors that I saw that were potentially true, where people think that PlayStation may be doing it so they can then slap that label onto the PS5 Pro and make it like, look, this one can do 8K and that one can't. Even though the new PlayStation Pro, from what I've seen, the reporting I've seen on it, will not be able to do it either. It's basically getting a like pretty considerable GPU uplift, but the CPU is barely any better at all, which is where the majority of the current console generations are struggling, is with being CPU locked. So it's kind of strange that they didn't address that instead. But it's thought that the GPU of the PS5 Pro is going to be focused more on like ray tracing and potentially their own DLSS type tech. And if they replace the CPU or upgrade it significantly, then you start to get into areas of like, that's like PS6 territory. Like, why not just upgrade the whole damn thing and make it the new system? And there's not a chance that PlayStation is gonna do that yet. They need to sell as many of those PS5s as they can. That is 100% the strategy there. So I wouldn't expect any major upgrades for a while. We also got a story that was kind of interesting about The Last of Us 2 potentially being ready to launch for months, potentially as far back as last winter of 2023. And that's just being held back for whatever reason, whether it's to coincide with the announcement of the PS5 Pro or whatever it is. But this does also include the PC version. So I'll be really curious to what happens with that. I would probably buy the PC port. I'm actually fairly curious to play that game. I've seen playthroughs of it, and it does look like something I'd be interested to at least try out. I think the way that they do these remasters and remakes and stuff is just, it's so grubby. It's so gross. Like, these things should just be uh, upgrades, at least for PS5. Like because I assume this is going to be, because I believe the first game was a PS4 game at the end of the PS4 time. I just I just don't get it. It's that they're Sony's just so lucky that they just have a handful of just really really good games, and they've just really really done such a good job of like molding their image, and they won that PS4 gen, man. They got to 100 million homes plus, and that's just, man, that's doing so much legwork for them right now, because I really think if you reset everything today, you know, it would just not be as simple of an argument. It would not be a 2-to-1 sales difference between the PS5 Pro and the PS5 and the Xbox Series consoles. It just wouldn't be. I think PlayStation would probably still win out because of their exclusives. They are still, probably ahead in that way in a lot of metrics. But I just, man, I just don't. It's very interesting. I'm really curious to what things are going to look like 5 years from now. It seems completely unknown, and I think it's going to be really curious to follow this, hopefully, for that long. With Nintendo, there was kind of a weird story that wasn't them specific, but chatter about how I guess multiple YouTube employees were found that they were releasing leaks for gaming stuff by having early access to showcases that were being uploaded to YouTube, like scheduled to release. There's a pretty good chance that that's why I believe like the Xbox showcase coming up here in a couple days is going to be streamed. It's not going to be like a YouTube premiere or whatever they've done before. That it's actually going to be streamed, and there's a pretty good chance it's because of this, and Nintendo specifically, that in some of their showcases it's believed that that's how some of the info has gotten leaked about Nintendo games before their announcements, because there were YouTube employees watching the videos early, or at least accessing them in some capacity, and getting info before it was officially released. So there you go. Jumping into summer Game Fest thoughts with my kind of other news. Man, that was an awful showcase. I'm recording this the night that it happened, hours later, and that was just that was the most boring. Like, it wasn't bad necessarily in the sense that there was anything like overly offensive, no more than what I expected from a Jeff Keighley show. Like, the ads were pretty bad, and it was funny because about 30 minutes into it, the big problem, in my opinion, is that the show didn't even kick off with any big pops. It literally, like, just nothing interesting, at least in my opinion. And then they got into the middle of the show, which with Keighley shows are always just ads, and that's what it was. And they were fine; they weren't too obnoxious. But the craziest thing that I noticed, and I mentioned to my chat when I was streaming it, is that there was like a 7-minute or 8-minute ad in the last like 30 or 20 minutes of the show. And typically that last like 30 minutes is where all the cool stuff really typically happens. It's they show a couple cool things at the start, it's a bunch of garbage in the middle, and then cool stuff at the end. And the middle has all the ads. Now, I assume when he's selling ads to companies, being able to put your ad in the last 20, 30 minutes of the show is probably really expensive. It's probably prime real estate. But he, at least from what I remember, has always kind of kept away from doing that because it leaves a sour taste. But they did it this time, and I think it's because overall the show was really weak. Not to say there was nothing good. There was lots of really great stuff. This was an indie show. There was some AAA stuff, but not much, and nothing super interesting, at least in my opinion. The Monster Hunter Wilds was shown a little bit. And I'm not a Monster Hunter guy. I've tried. I know it's a really popular series, so I won't downplay it. But I don't think it showed like particularly interestingly. It was just, oh yeah, a Monster Hunter game. Like it looked like a Monster Hunter game. But that was like the last like 7 or 8 minutes of the show. But literally in the last 20, 25 minutes, there was this really long, really obnoxious ad. And the craziest thing about it is it wasn't an ad for Game Fest. Or it was an ad I've seen on like YouTube. Like it was just a regular ad that they just played, and it went on forever. And it wasn't the only time that happened. There was multiple ads or trailers or whatever presentations that went on and on and on and on. And like I remember multiple times, like his shows, especially Summer Game Fest, is always pretty weak in my experience. This one was the weakest ever, and I think what's especially curious is that Summer Game Fest, I think is getting progressively worse. Like it was okay the first year, and then it was bad the last 2 or 3 years since then. With nothing really that he didn't even have Kojima this time. Like he didn't even have that ace in the hole, or no famous person came out and did anything. And maybe he was responding to criticism for not doing that, but because people didn't like that, so he stopped doing that. But I suspect he just couldn't really get anyone to this one. But this Summer Game Fest was bad. It was the worst one, and they've never been great. And then here in a few months you'll have the opening night live for Gamescom, but those are always bad too. And then his Game Awards are typically okay; they're better typically, but even last year's was not okay, and he caught a lot of crap for cutting off people in their awards ceremony, receiving their awards. And even, I think people kind of understood him cutting off people for the maybe smaller awards, even though, I think half of the awards got, delivered, didn't even get to come up. But then, like, Game of the Year, he didn't let him talk. He gave him like 30 seconds. It was really strange. His shows are weird, man. All his shows do for me is make me miss E3. Is make me miss like E3 proper. And it's so funny. And I've seen people like defending him and being like, "Well, he's trying his best" or whatever. The big one is with the ads, and we found out that costs $250,000 a minute to run an ad on his show, unless he lets you do it for free, which seems like it's pick and choose. He he just dogged on E3 so much when that relationship broke up between he and the ESA, and he really, especially when they were both doing things, or potentially doing things, he was like, he would really dog on them. And it's just, you can't talk like that and not show up yourself. Like, I don't think he's ever put on a show better than any of the E3s I remember. Like, he just hasn't. Like, even early, even the Game Awards, I just don't think any of those shows overall have been better. Like, people even dogged, like, what was it, like the 2020 E3 that was like digital. I think Greg Miller hosted it. I thought it was great because everything was there. Like, it was just all in one place and it was organized and scheduled. And I think what annoys me too is that Keeley, like this upcoming Xbox show, and I think the Ubisoft one and the PlayStation one, he like tries like kicking off Summer Game Fest with PlayStation, and like, there's more Summer Game Fest shows this weekend. Those shows aren't Summer Game Fest. Like, I don't think they're even labeling themselves as part of Summer Game Fest. He's just doing that, and so it's just like really odd. And I don't know. I don't think he's a very good steward of the gaming community, even though, and I don't even think gamers really like him that much. It's like pretty obviously just like the games media folks who are like obsessed with him, and seem like they really, really want his approval and his acceptance and to be part of his little club. And I'm kind of wondering how lucrative that really is moving forward. I think that these shows are pretty underwhelming. The future of the show, I mean, I'm sure he'll keep doing them, but Summer Game Fest doesn't seem to be getting better. It seems to only be getting worse. It's still bloated. It got really boring this year with like no pops, at least not for me. And it was just, I don't know. Opening Night Live, I don't expect to be good because Gamescom is in like a weird time of the year. And then the Game Awards, like, especially this year, I assume he'll have some big pops there. Maybe. I don't know. It's weird. It's just a strange situation. I don't necessarily think I would want him to not keep doing it. But like, we have like IGN Live happening this whole weekend. And even though admittedly I haven't caught much of it, kind of what they're doing feels a lot more like what I think would be better. It's not necessarily E3, but it's definitely more in that vein of, there's kind of like always something going on. I think the final thing I'll say about it is that, when people were kind of defending Keeley doing all these ads and stuff during these shows, even big people, like I saw it on Kind of Funny and in other places, people saying like, well, he's got to pay for the production and for the studio, for the venue, doing at the YouTube Arena or whatever in LA. He doesn't have to do that. Like, the show that came today did not have to be on a big stage with hundreds or thousands of people in the audience in the middle of LA, with all the production it had. That show did not need to have it. It doesn't have to have all that. So if it's the difference between the show being an hour shorter with fewer ads and having lower production and not being a place for him to invite all of his friends, okay, then do a show that's sustainable and is better. Like, I don't know why it has to be this big event, because it definitely doesn't earn it. Like, the show, the Summer Game Fest shown today did not earn the venue, did not earn that audience, did not earn people paying. People traveled. People paid for plane tickets and traveled and paid for hotels, very expensive hotels in LA, and paid for tickets to this event. And it was terrible. And it was bad. It was a bad event. And you're going to see people defending it and saying it was fine, blah, blah, blah. But like, it wasn't. It was bad. I will put my foot down and say that. And so, if the show isn't worth that venue, if the show isn't worth that audience, then don't do it. Do something else. He doesn't have to do it. People act like, he's doing this like service to the gaming community. He doesn't have to. No one's forcing him, except himself. And he's probably making a crap ton of money off of it. Dragon Age 4, formerly known as Dreadwolf, is now known as Dragon Age The Veilguard. This was announced in a BioWare blog this week from Greg McKay, I believe, who's the head of BioWare. And they basically said that it just reflects the nature of the game better. What I think happened is I think Dreadwolf, which refers to one of the characters from Inquisition, especially because of a DLC that came with that game, it was assumed that character would be the main villain of this coming game. I'm betting that as the game finished up or is finishing up, and they looked at the way the game is, I'm sure that character is a huge part of the game, but is probably not as big of a part of the game, or is not the role people would assume from the game being named after them. And so it seems like this Veilguard is actually the group that you're going to be a part of, your protagonist, which is going to be a new protagonist in the series. I don't care. It's fine. I'm just excited for this game. Probably the biggest thing that I'm excited for is that on Tuesday, the 11th at 8 a.m. Pacific time, I believe, they're going to be showing off 15 minutes of gameplay. So this will be the first gameplay we've ever seen of this game. It's been in development since like Anthem came out. So pretty big deal. It's been through a lot of trouble. And for me, very selfishly, this game coming out means that sooner than later, they can move the bulk of their team over to Mass Effect, and we start, that 4 to 8 year wait for that game. So hopefully on the lower end of that. I believe it seems like so before this officially got announced, Jeff Grubb and Shinobi602 and Jason Schreier all had kind of posted or said things alluding to this name change. And Jeff Grubb specifically was, when talking about the Xbox showcase, when people asked if Dragon Age Dreadwolf was going to be there, he was saying Dragon Age Dreadwolf won't be, but Dragon Age will be. So I'm expecting that they may show a trailer or a cinematic, and then that will announce the actual gameplay showcase on the 11th. That's what I'm assuming. I still am holding on to the tiniest hopes that maybe we also get a Mass Effect trailer or teaser or something, because they rarely show Dragon Age without Mass Effect, because I think that Mass Effect is probably still the brand that they, feel like is the bigger deal to more people, but we'll wait and see. I won't be planning on that. To wrap up some of the bottom of the list news here, Destiny 2 has released what's presumed to be its final DLC, the Final Shape. I don't care about Destiny 2. I've tried. I played a decent amount of it when it came out. Just not my type of game. But it's being received extremely well. People seem to really be enjoying it. It seems like it's a relatively short experience. People are finishing in like one evening, but that it's very beloved, and it seems like people are really happy with how they're kind of wrapping up what is assumed to be the wrap up of this game. What comes next for Bungie is interesting. They have the extraction shooter multiplayer game that's on all platforms, Marathon, that's supposed to be coming sooner than later. I assume probably next year. And I assume Destiny 3. I don't know what else they would do. I find it so hard to believe that they would do something else. But there's also that argument that looter shooter game is not what it was before. Now it's extraction games, and it's, that I think that genre has kind of fizzled a bit. But you can't argue with Destiny 2's longevity. Like, while that genre may not be hitting big like it did at one point, the Destiny 2 is held pretty strong. So I'm definitely curious to what happens next with Bungie. Obviously, now they're with Sony as their corporate overlords. So we'll have to see how that impacts things as well. It's going to be one to keep an eye on. Baldur's Gate 3 has mod support incoming in September, and it's actually currently being alpha tested if for people who are in that modding community. So I'm excited about this. I have a Act 3 Baldur's Gate 3 playthrough that I haven't finished yet. If you ever look at the Nexus mods page for Baldur's Gate 3, it's just all cosmetic stuff, like for the most part. There's some other stuff, but it's like 99% cosmetic things. And so this mod support will be cool because it's going to add a lot more tools for modding. And we'll probably see some like custom gameplay scenarios. We'll just see a lot more in-depth things as mods instead of just like giving your elf big titties or different colored hair like the current mods mostly do. So for my Division fans, an interesting development of former Ubisoft Massive CEO David Polfelt is now heading up a new studio called Bespoke Pixel in Barcelona. And supposedly they've received $25 million of initial funding. So this is kind of an interesting one. So Polfelt is the one who took over Ubisoft Massive when they got purchased by Ubisoft years ago. Was one of the main people kind of at the top of the company as they developed the Division as one of their first like big franchise with Ubisoft, as well as getting the Avatar deal to make that game. He left a few years ago. He's been replaced by someone who was in like the movie media system. We don't really hear much about him. He seems to kind of manage Massive from a more quiet position where Polfelt was a lot more outspoken. Polfelt has a really, really good book. If you want to kind of half the book is about his getting into the games industry as someone who, at the time that he got in, you couldn't like go to school for games. You had to kind of end up in games. So the first half of the book is mostly that, and it's interesting. And then the second half of the book is about like Ubisoft Massive and some really cool info about like the Division and its development, Division 2. There's a really cool part of the book about how they ended up with the Avatar license to make that game. Part of the story is that James Cameron and his team went to another studio in Europe to give them the license, but when they met with them, like everyone in the meeting was coked up and like obviously on drugs, and so they didn't trust them, and they got like a last minute pitch from Massive, and they went with them instead. I still think that studio was CDPR. If I had to throw out my wild speculation, but read the book, make your own decisions, your own ideas on that maybe. But the Dream Architects is a really cool book by this guy. So I'll be curious to what they do. When he left, he was initially, so David Polfelt left Massive on like a sabbatical and was supposed to return in a different role as not the CEO, and turned it down. I assume because this Bespoke Pixel was probably getting going, and he decided to do that instead. So good for him. The final thing is it got announced at IGN Live this weekend that Ludwig, who's a pretty well-known game streamer, and Pirate Software's Thor, who Pirate Software, if you don't pay attention to gaming Twitch, kind of exploded in the last year or so as this game dev who streams game dev stuff and plays games on stream, and has like really taken Twitch by storm. I love watching his streams. He's a pretty cool dude. He and Ludwig have combined to start a new gaming publisher called Off-Brand Games. This is kind of in the same vein as like Donkey, who started his own studio, which its first game that came out was Animal Well. And if you don't know about that, it's a game that's like 30 megabytes and is probably on a lot of game journalists' Game of the Year list. So, it worked out for them. I suspect this will be an interesting partnership, and they'll do some cool publishing stuff. But the era of the indies seems to be upon us, as all the AAAs take 10 years to make a game. The indies are definitely picking up a lot of slack, and picking up a lot of that cash, I bet. So cool little story there. I don't really know much about Ludwig, but Thor is awesome, and I'm excited to see what they do with that opportunity. And I'm going to take the opportunity to wrap up this podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please consider supporting all of my content by watching, listening, sharing, and following socials and all my other bits of content and places that I post that. You can also throw a few bucks my way by checking out some of the links in the description of the show. You can see what else I do there. My plan for the Xbox Showcase and the Ubisoft show is to cover those in next week's episode, which I will... I may do videos as well, so keep an eye on my YouTube, but we'll see. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire podcast. So until next time.